What if one act of betrayal unleashed a chain of events that shattered two ancient empires and opened the door to a new faith that would change the world forever? This is the story of how a single coup in Constantinople sparked a war so catastrophic that it erased centuries of dominance and gave rise to a new civilization. The Byzantine-Sasanian War of the early 7th century wasn't just a clash of armies, it was the funeral of the old world. At the dawn of the 7th century, the ancient superpowers of Rome and Persia were drawn into a cataclysm that would reshape humanity's destiny. It began when the Byzantine Emperor Maurice was overthrown and murdered by his own officer, the brutal Phocas. In response, Khosrow II, the Persian King of Kings, sought revenge for his fallen ally and launched a full-scale invasion of Byzantine lands. The result was devastation on a scale unseen since antiquity. Persian armies swept across the eastern provinces like wildfire, seizing Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and much of Anatolia. When Heraclius ascended the throne in 610, he inherited a realm in ruins, bankrupt, bleeding, and besieged. Yet, against all odds, the new emperor refused to yield. After years of desperate defense, he rallied his forces, reformed the army, and forged bold alliances with the nomadic Turks of the steppe. In 622, he struck back, invading Persia in a series of daring campaigns that culminated at the Battle of Nineveh, where his victory restored the empire's pride and nearly its old borders. By 628, both empires stood exhausted, their treasuries empty, their armies shattered, and their people weary of endless war. And from that exhaustion, a new power began to rise from the deserts of Arabia. Under the Prophet Muhammad and his successors, the Rashidun Caliphate united the tribes of the peninsula and marched outward, filling the vacuum left by the dying giants. Within a decade, the Byzantines lost Syria and Palestine after crushing defeats at Yarmouk and Jerusalem. Egypt followed in 642. The Sassanids fared even worse. Crushed at Al-Qadisiyah, their capital Ctesiphon fell soon after, and by 651, the once mighty Persian Empire was gone. Islam had arrived, and with it, a new world order. Byzantium survived behind the walls of Constantinople and the mountains of Anatolia, but its age as the master of the Mediterranean had ended forever. Finally, a special shout-out to TylerInit965, who's been commenting this idea under every single video for over a year. This one's for you. Now, back to history. The hardened Emperor Maurice, last of the Justinian dynasty, met a gruesome fate when Phocas, a coarse centurion turned usurper, staged a violent coup. On November 27, 602, at the harbor of Chalcedon, the emperor and his sons were slaughtered, their bodies thrown into the sea. Theodosius, Maurice's eldest, perished alongside his brothers, leaving no heir to challenge the tyrant. Empress Constantina and her daughters were confined to a monastery, only to face execution a few years later as Phocas secured his rule through terror. Had Theodosius escaped to Persia, as some rumors later claimed, he might have sought the aid of Khosrow II, just as Maurice had once supported Khosrow's return to the throne back in 591. But this time, no messenger reached Ctesiphon. Phocas's reign was a nightmare, a blood-soaked chapter in Roman history. His paranoia drove him to purge every trace of Maurice's family, while the provinces descended into revolt. The Avars and Slavs ravaged the Balkans, sacking cities as far as Thessalonica, while Persia prepared for vengeance. By 608, the empire was burning from within. In Africa, Heraclius the Elder, the exarch of Carthage, and his son Heraclius the Younger rose in rebellion. As their cousin Nicetas advanced by land, Heraclius sailed for the capital. On October 5, 610, his fleet stormed Constantinople. Phocas was dragged before him, and his severed head paraded on a spear. His gilded statue in the Roman Forum, once a symbol of his arrogance, was torn down. Heraclius, only 35 years old, was crowned emperor over the ruins of an empire. The treasury was empty, the Balkans ravaged, and Egypt, the empire's breadbasket, divided by religious conflict between Chalcedonian orthodoxy and Monophysite descent. Knowing that Persia posed the gravest danger, Heraclius sought peace with Khosrow II. As the 7th century Armenian historian Sebios recorded, when Heraclius took power, he sent envoys with great gifts and humble entreaties to the King of Kings, asking for peace. Without Theodosius alive as a cause for war, Khosrow accepted. In 611, Byzantium paid a crushing tribute for pace and ceded the Armenian lands gained in 591. Yet this treaty also renewed Persia's tolerance for Christians, easing long-strained tensions. The truce bought Heraclius precious time to rebuild. Persia, swollen with Roman gold, reinforced its defenses, both sides knowing that peace would not last. With a momentary reprieve, Heraclius turned inward. He revitalized the empire using Maurice's exarchate system, empowering regional governors to manage crises locally. From Africa, grain and coin flowed again into Constantinople, while Ravenna held firm in Italy against Lombard incursions. In Africa, Berber raids were repelled. In Italy, Ravenna's walls held strong. This stability allowed Heraclius to turn north, launching a bold campaign to reclaim the Balkans from the Avars and Slavs, beginning with the struggle for Singidunum in 613. In the ashes of civil war, the Byzantine Empire began to breathe again. Heraclius, the soldier emperor who rose from rebellion, had taken a dying state and given it pulse, order, and direction. But even as he restored the empire's pride, unseen storms were gathering beyond its frontiers. The deserts whispered with prophecy, the mountains groaned with armies in motion, and the old gods and new faiths prepared for a reckoning. This was the age when the fate of three civilizations, Roman, Persian, and Arab, would collide in a struggle that would decide the world's spiritual future. After reclaiming Singidunum, Heraclius pressed onward. Between 613 and 615, he drove the Slavic tribes back across the Danube in a relentless counteroffensive. For years, the Balkans had burned under their raids, but now, under imperial banners once again, the legions returned with vengeance. Fortresses were rebuilt, rivers patrolled, and frontier militias established from Thrace to Moesia. When the dust settled, the Danube frontier stood firm. The long shadow of barbarian conquest had finally lifted. But victory in the north could not mask the chaos in Egypt, the empire's lifeblood. The province, once the granary of Rome, was consumed by sectarian fire. Theological fury had split the faithful, the Chalcedonians, loyal to Constantinople, and the Monophytes, who rejected imperial orthodoxy and rallied peasants and monks across the Nile Valley. Under Phocas, that rift had widened into an open wound. Determined to heal it, Heraclius unleashed a campaign of ruthless reform. Beginning in 612, imperial troops and bishops moved in tandem, deposing Monophite clergy, confiscating rebellious monasteries, and restoring the authority of the Council of Chalcedon. The Monophite movement, largely rural and monastic, was systematically dismantled. By 620, its leaders were scattered or dead, their writings banned, their followers subdued. The emperor's hand was heavy, but his aim was unity. He rebuilt the defenses of Alexandria, strengthened Pelusium, and revived the irrigation channels along the Nile that had fallen into disrepair. Egypt's fields bloomed once again, its granaries filled, and the empire's lifeline was secured. To govern this vast and volatile region, Heraclius created the Exarchate of Egypt, entrusting it to his cousin Nicetas, a man whose loyalty was as unbending as his discipline. The results were nothing short of miraculous. Within a decade, from 611 to 621, Heraclius had dragged Byzantium from the brink of collapse. The treasury, once empty, brimmed with new taxes. Trade caravans returned to the Mediterranean routes. Soldiers, newly disciplined under the doctrines of the Strategicon, trained in Anatolia with the precision of old Roman legions. Mercenaries were dismissed, professionalism restored. The empire was recovering, but everyone knew the peace was temporary. Across the mountains of Armenia, Khosrow II watched, waiting. The Persian king had not forgotten Maurice, nor the blood debt of his allies' murder. He fortified the eastern marches, gathered gold, and forged alliances among the desert tribes. Heraclius, in turn, wrapped himself in the mantle of Maurice's memory, commissioning saints' lives that painted the fallen emperor as a martyr and himself as his divinely appointed avenger. But in the great geopolitical theater of the 7th century, the drama was not confined to Rome and Persia. For beyond the deserts of Iraq and Syria, in the endless dunes of Arabia, a new power was awakening. For centuries, the Lakhmids, Christian Arab vassals of Persia, had acted as a buffer between empires. But when their last king, Al-Numan III, betrayed Khosrow, the Shah unleashed his wrath. In 604, Persian cataphracts thundered across the desert, crushing the Lakhmid armies at Dikar, ending their dynasty and annexing their territory. The conquest transformed Arabia's political balance. Persia now controlled Al-Hira, the gateway between Mesopotamia and the sands beyond. Khosrow's victory secured the incense routes, the gold and spice trade, and cemented his title as Apervez, the victorious. From the Gulf to the Red Sea, tribal chieftains now paid tribute to Ctesiphon. Persian coins, stamped with the fire of Ahura Mazda, circulated in markets once ruled by nomads. The Shahanshah's empire seemed eternal. But in the western deserts, a lone preacher was gathering tribes beneath a new banner. Muhammad of Mecca, once a merchant, now spoke of one God, one faith, one destiny. His message was spreading dangerously fast. By 625, Muhammad had unified much of the Hijaz, forming the first Muslim polity in history. Raids, alliances, and conversions turned scattered clans into an army of believers. His envoys reached the Persian-aligned tribes of Oman in 628, calling them to join his mission. But the chiefs, fearing Khosrow's wrath more than divine retribution, executed the messengers and sent their severed heads to Ctesiphon, a declaration of allegiance sealed in blood. The insult ignited war. Muhammad, enraged, proclaimed a jihad against Persia. And so began a desert war that might have ended differently, but in this world, it did not. Khosrow, now an old man but still a lion, rallied his empire with terrifying speed. His cataphracts, armored from crown to hoof, thundered into Arabia. Arab auxiliaries under Persian command swept through the sands like a storm. The war lasted 4 years, a relentless campaign of fire and faith. At the Battle of Yamama in 629, the Sassanid army crushed a massive Muslim host. Persian lancers cut through the lines, slaughtering warriors and scattering tribes. Many captured chieftains renounced Islam, swearing allegiance to the Shahanshah. The deserts ran red. In the following years, Persian logistics triumphed where prophecy failed. Supply columns, fortified oases, and mounted archers broke the back of the Arab resistance. One by one, the tribes bent the knee. By 633, even Medina trembled. Then came the final blow. The Byzantine-aligned Ghassarids, ever opportunistic, invaded from the west, capturing Medina in 634 and extending their dominion deep into Arabia. Muhammad and his followers fled eastward, seeking refuge in the sands, but Persia's cavalry found them at Al-Rabada. There, surrounded by the iron tide of cataphracts, the last faithful stood their ground. When the charge came, the desert shook. The Persians rode through the defenders like a flood through reeds. The prophet fell, and with him, the new faith. By 635, the world had changed. Islam was gone, its light extinguished before it could leave Arabia. Persia ruled unchallenged, stretching from the Nile to the Indus, from the mountains of Armenia to the coasts of Yemen. Caravans brought frankincense, myrrh, gold, slaves, and silk to the fire temples of Ctesiphon. The empire's wealth was beyond measure, its influence absolute. Khosrow II was no longer merely the victorious. He became Khosrow the Great, heir to Cyrus and Darius. His banners flew over Mecca and Jerusalem alike. His governors ruled from fortresses across Arabia, and Persian satraps oversaw provinces once thought untamable. Arabia, once a land of warring tribes, was now a satrapy of the eternal empire. Persian culture flowed into the sands: language, architecture, art, and administration. The old gods of fire mingled with the crosses of Christ. In Ctesiphon, under the influence of his Christian queen Shirin, Khosrow encouraged a fragile tolerance. Churches rose beside fire temples. Nestorian scholars debated Zoroastrian priests. Persian nobles baptized their sons, while Christian bishops wore robes embroidered with Zoroastrian symbols. Under Khosrow's vision, a hybrid civilization emerged, one neither wholly Persian nor Roman, but something new. A world where Christianity spread eastward under Persian protection, where the Church of the East became a global power, and where the West's holy empire never rose. The flame of Islam had been smothered and the course of human history forever altered. By the 630s, the world had changed beyond recognition. The Prophet's banner no longer fluttered in Arabia, and the desert that might have birthed a new faith now lay under the shadow of two ancient crosses, one Roman, one Persian. The earth was quieter, but beneath that calm stretched an age of transformation. For the first time in history, Christianity had become the faith of both empires that ruled the civilized world. Yet the peace between Constantinople and Ctesiphon would prove as fragile as parchment in flame. In 633, the aging Khosrow the Great began to shape his empire's soul as well as its borders. Having conquered Arabia and restored Persia's supremacy, he turned his attention to what he believed would outlast conquests: faith. Seeking unity, he issued a decree that stunned the nobility. Vast tracts of Mesopotamian farmland and temple estates were granted to Christian monasteries, along with sweeping tax exemptions for the clergy. To the Zoroastrian Magi, this was sacrilege. For centuries, they had stood at the heart of Persian identity, keepers of the holy flame, guardians of divine order. Now they watched as their temples emptied, their stipends vanished, and their students converted to the growing Christian schools of Edessa and Nisibis. The fire altars still burned, but fewer came to kneel before them. Persia's sacred flame was dimming. Across the deserts of Arabia, Christian missionaries fanned out among the tribes that had once followed Muhammad. Their words were gentle, their message familiar: salvation, not conquest. To many who had survived the Arab-Sasanian War, the promise of peace in Christ's name was irresistible. Within a decade, much of the peninsula professed Christianity, a version infused with Persian discipline and Eastern mysticism. When Khosrow died in 637, the empire he left behind was stable, rich, and united. His chosen heir was not a prince of royal blood, but Mardan, son of the general Shahin, a brilliant, cosmopolitan young man raised by his Christian mother in the intellectual salons of Ctesiphon. Upon ascending the throne, Mardan took a step no Persian monarch had dared before. He publicly embraced Christianity. His coronation was a spectacle that rippled across continents. Bishops from Armenia and Syria stood beside Zoroastrian lords. Latin hymns mingled with Persian chants. The air shimmered with incense from both altar and fire temple. Then came the Edict of Equality in 638, a proclamation that Christians and Zoroastrians were equal before the law. To the Magi, it was the beginning of the end. To the people, it was a miracle. Armenia rejoiced, the Mesopotamian plains filled with new churches, and the Persian elite, pragmatic as ever, quietly baptized their children. For the first time since Darius the Great, Persia was united not by fire and steel, but by an idea. While Persia entered its golden twilight, Byzantium surged toward a new dawn. Emperor Heraclius, freed at last from centuries of Eastern war, cast his gaze westward, to the lands that had once been Rome's beating heart. In Italy, the Lombards ruled like fractured warlords. Their king Agilulf had once forged a semblance of order, but after his death, the crown passed to his unstable son Adalawald, a youth plagued by madness and manipulation. His mother, the formidable Theodolinda, governed in his name, but her regency only deepened divisions. The Arian nobility despised the Catholic Italians who looked to the Pope, while rival dukes in Spoleto and Benevento plotted their own ambitions. Heraclius saw opportunity. In 616, he formed an alliance with King Clothar II of the Franks, uniting two Christian realms under a single purpose: to reclaim Italy for the true empire. Byzantine fleets landed in Apulia, while Frankish legions thundered through the Alpine passes, their banners glinting beneath winter sun. The campaign was swift and merciless. Adalawald's erratic orders alienated his nobles, defections followed. In Rome, Pope Boniface IV declared the Byzantines liberators of the faith, and citizens opened the city gates. By 620, Milan had fallen to the Franks. Verona followed soon after, sealing the Lombards' fate. By 623, the Lombard kingdom ceased to exist. Northern Italy was absorbed by the Franks, while Byzantium reorganized the south into the Exarchate of Italia, governed from Ravenna. Roads long abandoned were rebuilt, aqueducts repaired, and once again, imperial legions marched between Rome and Constantinople. The Church, freed from Arian persecution, blossomed into the spiritual bridge between East and West. But Heraclius was not content with victory on one front. Beyond the Pyrenees, the Visigothic kingdom of Spain was imploding under its own corruption. The death of King Ctesiphon in 621 sparked civil strife. The usurper Suintila seized the throne through murder, only to alienate the clergy and nobility alike. His attempt to claim the last Byzantine ports in Spain failed disastrously, leaving him isolated. Meanwhile, the young Prince Richard II, smuggled from Toledo, arrived in Constantinople, where Heraclius saw in him both legitimacy and leverage. When Suintila's armies faltered again in 625, Byzantine fleets sailed westward with the prince aboard, carrying soldiers, gold, and imperial banners. In Seville, the venerable Bishop Isidore, disillusioned by years of chaos, rallied the church behind the boy's return. Defections multiplied. Visigothic nobles joined the Byzantine cause. By 627, Toledo fell. Suintila was executed, and Richard was crowned under Byzantine auspices. The cross of Christ and the double-headed eagle united on his coins. Spain, like Italy, was drawn back into the imperial orbit. Trade flowed freely across the Mediterranean once again, from Alexandria's grain ships to the silver ports of Hispania. By 641, the dream of empire, long thought lost, was alive once more. From the Atlantic coast of Iberia to the mountains of Armenia, from the Nile to the Danube, the Byzantine Empire shone as the greatest power on earth. Heraclius, hailed as Restitutor Orbis, the restorer of the world, presided over a court that blended Greek learning with Latin statecraft, orthodox piety with classical reason. Yet the balance was fragile. Across the eastern horizon, the Christian Sassanid Empire under King Mardan had inherited both the wealth and ambition of Khosrow. But while Byzantium upheld the Chalcedonian creed, Persia followed the Nestorian path, two interpretations of the same faith, separated by language, culture, and pride. The world that had once fought for gods of fire and stone now prepared to fight over the nature of a single god made flesh. Two empires, two Christs, stared at each other across the Euphrates. And so began an age not of faith's rise, but of its division, an eternal Cold War of theology and empire where Rome and Persia would once again wrestle for the heart of mankind. History, it seems, never ends. It only changes its costume. The banners that once bore eagles and lions now carried crosses, but beneath them the same ambitions burned. Would the future belong to Constantinople's disciplined legions or to Ctesiphon's golden kings? Tell us in the comments, who would win this new Roman-Persian struggle? If you enjoyed this journey through an alternate past, remember to like, subscribe, and join our growing community of history lovers.